Let's play with audio just a little bit. I'm going to bring in some music to start my show and maybe to play in the background for the first little bit, and maybe I'll throw it back in at the end for the credit roll. But also, I need to make sure that the volume all the way through my piece is consistent and that my overall levels are where I want them to be. So it's not terribly difficult. There are about three things to keep in mind here. So, first of all, let's just talk about how to change the volume on a single clip. So let's imagine that here on Stand Up 2, I wanted to make this clip louder or quieter.
The best way to tell is by looking at the surface of a beat.
Now, before I actually jump to any conclusions about whether it needs to be louder or quieter, I might need to get an objective view of how loud it is. There is a tiny set of audio meters here at the very right-hand corner at the top of the timeline.
When beans are roasted, it brings to the surface oils.
There's not a lot of information there. So if you're working with the audio, it might be useful to go ahead and turn on the mixer button, which will open the little set of controls here at the bottom right-hand corner of the window, as well as give you larger meters so you can more easily see.
When those oils have been exposed to the air for a long time, they start to turn rancid. And
Now I've got a better idea of what my volume looks like. Let's not worry about any of these controls at the moment. We will come back to those in a little while, but for the moment, let's just use this as an easy way to have audio levels that we can monitor. Now, if I look at my timeline, there's a little horizontal line that runs across the audio portion here. You might not see it depending on how your view options are set up. So let's go revisit that real quick. In the top left-hand corner of the timeline, you've got your timeline view options, audio view options, and track heights. If you go to one of the views that really collapses things, you will not see these horizontal lines that I was looking at. They disappear. But even if I go back to my view, if I don't have the audio waveforms turned on, that horizontal line doesn't appear. So I need to have the audio waveforms turned on, and I need for my track to be big enough that I can see what's going on. I might actually choose to make my audio tracks a little bit bigger. But now that I can see these little horizontal lines coming across here, I can get to work. All I have to do is point my mouse directly at that horizontal line, and you see that it changes into a vertical adjustment icon. So if I click and drag this down, I will make the entire clip quieter.
they start to turn rancid, and it can affect
If I click and drag up, I can make the entire clip louder.
the coffee flavor. So we want to be
And you can see the audio waveforms changing as I move it up and down. So if I simply need to change the volume of a clip, that's all there is to it. Point at the horizontal line and click and drag. It can get more complicated than that, though. What if I want to change the volume of part of a clip? For example, here in Stand Up 3,
wheel grinder as opposed to a blade grinder. A wheel grinder.
so right there he repeats himself. He's talking about the difference between wheel and blade grinders, and he says a wheel, a wheel. So maybe we want to mute that. We don't really want to cut it with the razor blade because we're not trying to add a jump cut, but we might want to try to take that sound out. And we could pretend that it's not actually words. Maybe he sneezes, maybe he clears his throat, maybe his stomach rumbles, maybe a chicken crows in the background. So I'm going to start by zooming in fairly close to get a better view here at what we're looking at. And let's play that again.
A blade grinder. A wheel.
So this little chunk of waveform right here is where he says a wheel the first time. And this is what we're interested in muting. Now I can't just grab that horizontal line and pull it down because I'm turning the whole clip down. What I need to be able to do is isolate part of that. And this is done with something that's called keyframes. Now, if I point my mouse at that line, again, we see it turn into the vertical adjustment thing. But if I do this, and I'm on a Mac, I'm going to hold down the Option key. If you're on a PC, it would be the alternate key. It's the second modifier there. But I'm going to hold that down, and I'm going to single click. And you'll see that it puts a little red dot there. All by itself, that's not that impressive. If I click and drag that red dot up and down, it doesn't seem to be any different. Okay, so let me undo that. So putting the one red dot there didn't really accomplish anything. Let me put a second red dot and let's see what happens now when I start to move one of these. Oh, look at that. Everything to the left of the red dot moved because there was nothing to hold it in place, but everything to the right of the second dot did nothing. If you think about this horizontal line as a rubber band that's been stretched across a cork board, and these little dots that I'm putting in here, think of them as thumbtacks. I'm sticking thumbtacks through the rubber band. Because there's a thumbtack here where this second dot is, it's holding the rubber band in place. So even though I'm pulling the rubber band to the left of it down, nothing to the right can move. So let me undo that. I want to take this a little bit further, and I'm going to stick two more thumbtacks through my rubber band. These are actually called keyframes. So now I've got a series of 4 rubber band thumbtacks here. I've got a series of 4 keyframes. So these on the outside, this first one on the left, and you notice that when I single click on it, it turns red, so I know that it's selected. This first one on the left is going to hold everything to the left of it in position. The second one I'm going to pull all the way down, so the volume drops. This third one I'm also going to pull all the way down, so the volume drops, and then the fourth one protect everything to the right. So what I've done is I've created a dip in the volume. So as it plays, we'll hear Scott talking, then the volume will fade down, we shouldn't hear anything, and then it will fade back up at the end. Now because the audio is on 2 tracks, I'm going to have to do this twice. So I'm going to just eyeballing it here, line it up as best I can. There's my 4 dots. And a shortcut to this is I can actually grab the line in between those 2 keyframes and just pull that line down. All right, so let's see what we have accomplished here.
As opposed to a blade grinder. A wheel grinder will
All right, I got rid of the stutter.
blade grinder. A wheel grinder will
Okay, so this is a pretty decent job here. We hear him say whatever he's saying, and then the stutter is faded out, and then he starts talking again.
blade grinder. A wheel grinder will crush the beans as a
Now, if we're looking at the video, we can see that his mouth is moving. So this might not be my strongest choice here. Maybe the jump cut and using some B-roll to hide it would be a better choice. But you can see that I can use this to manipulate audio levels over time. This is called rubber banding because of the analogy I made earlier, or keyframing, using keyframes to adjust the volume. All right, so let's zoom back out here. So I want to go ahead and add music at this point. So there is a song in this project. It's called Thinking Big. This is just a generic piece of music. If you double click it, you can look at it in the audio waveform here in the preview window. Okay, so I'm actually going to set an endpoint right there. Okay, so we've got a little bit more instrumentation. This is going to happen under the title at the very start of my video. So I'm just going to click and drag this down here, and I don't have an audio channel 3 or an audio channel 4, but I'm going to drag it underneath audio 1 and 2 to where audio channel 3 would be if I had it. I'm going to put this on an adjacent layer at the beginning of my timeline. Okay, so let's play this and see what we got.
Hello, I'm Scott, and welcome to my kitchen. Today we'll be talking
So overall, it starts the way I want it to. My graphics are on the screen, the music is playing, the musical volume is not too loud. I might want to bring the whole thing down just a little bit. But by the time he starts talking, I can't hear him, right? So I need the music to fade down. So let me zoom in on this part of the screen. So about there, this, we've finished with the first two measures of the song. That seems like a good place to start the fade out. So again, I'm going to insert an audio keyframe here. Just make sure the clip is selected. I'm holding down my second modifier key, which is Option on my Mac. I believe it's alternate on your PC. It annoys me that there's not a visual confirmation I'm doing something, right? The icon doesn't change, but if I single click and that keyframe appears, then we know we're good to go. Then I want to move down here. I can see in the audio waveforms where Scott is about to start talking, right? I can see where his first words come out. So I'm going to put a second audio keyframe there. And then I'm just going to grab this second one and pull it down. And we're going to aim for something around -30 and see what that sounds like.
Hello, I'm Scott and welcome to my kitchen. Today we'll be talking about how to make the perfect cup of cappuccino. We'll start with filter.
All right, that's fine. So I'm just going to let that run. We could, if we wanted to, go to the end of it and have a fade out, but the song has got a natural end, so I'm just not even going to worry about that. So let's take a listen here. I want to jump to the end of this song and see how it does end. Okay, so it does have a natural ending to it. I'm going to take advantage of that actually down here at the for the credit roll. So I am going to mark an out point there where the fade is ending. And then I'm going to mark an end point just before it. And I'm going to pull this down and line it up with the tail end of my project. All right, and let me zoom in a little bit here. Let me zoom in a little bit on the end. Now I'm starting to crowd myself a little bit, so I can also slide this division between my video and my audio up, so I've got a little more space. And I want the, let me turn snapping on. I want the end of the music to line up with the end of the credits. Now again, it's a little bit too loud overall, so I'm going to bring that volume down just a little bit. And then what I want is for the music to fade up into the credit roll. So here's the beginning of the credit roll, and that's where I believe he goes, or maybe that's where he says bon appetit. But either way, I'm going to go ahead and mark my keyframe. Actually, let's find out for sure what he's saying there. If you look at the left hand here where the audio 1, 2, and 3 labels are, there's 4 buttons actually underneath each one. Real quickly, this first one is a lock. It means that you can't make any changes to the track, and there's one just like it for video. I can lock layers if I'm afraid of accidentally cutting something. The second one, don't worry about for now. And then these last two are S and M, solo and mute. So if I turn on solo, it will only play this channel. If I turn on mute, it will silence that channel. So for the moment, I'm going to mute the music.
For color and flavor.
Just to see what he's about to say here at the very end.
And there you have the perfect cup of cappuccino. Bon appetit.
All right, so I don't want to lose the word bon appetit, so that's really where I'm going to start my fade, right where he says bon appetit. All right, so let me unmute the audio because I want to hear what I'm doing, and I'm going to hold down my Option key and single click there to start put the first keyframe, and then I'm going to come down here just a little bit to whatever that swell is and put the second keyframe. And then I'm just going to drag this first one down into that -30 area where I had the music earlier. Now this is going to start abruptly. I'll fix that
Cinnamon
in a second.
for color and flavor. And there you have the perfect cup of cappuccino.
Now we should hear the audio
Bon
swell.
appetit.
And it will run through the credit roll. It's a little bit too loud, so I'm going to grab that second one and pull it down just a little bit. Maybe even just a little bit further than that. Maybe somewhere in that -10 area. And then the music runs out with the video. Really nice, right? Okay, so I've got a little gap here with no background music, but I can actually fix that pretty easily. So what I'm going to do is, this is not going to make a lot of sense, but this piece of music ends, right?
Now comes the tricky part. The milk's starting to get good and hot, and we can tell by the sound it's making. And we're ready to start just dropping the milk below the level of the...
So we can barely hear that the music's there. I think I'm going to get away with this pretty easily. I'm just going to take this second one. It's the same song. I'm just going to stretch it until they match, until they line up there. Let's see if we hear what we hear.
dropping the milk below the level of the... where the steam comes in. This is what creates the nice rich foam.
Okay, we hear it come in, but I think that maybe if I grab this first keyframe and pull it down just a little bit further.
Now comes the tricky part. The milk's starting to get good and hot, and we can tell by the sound it's making. And we're ready to start just dropping the milk below the level of the... where the steam comes in. This is what creates the nice rich foam.
Yeah, I don't hear that at all. I think that's going to be perfect. The fact that I'm doing it underneath the steaming is really letting me get away with something here. But let me zoom in just a little bit. If that weren't the case, what I would do is I would actually take this first clip and I would shorten it a fair bit. Because this is the natural end of the music that I'm getting rid of. And I would take this second clip and I would stretch it. So now they're still bumping up against each other. They're bumping up against each other somewhere in the middle. Let me turn on the solo and let's listen just to the music. Okay, it's clearly a cut, but let's get really sneaky here. Let me go to my effects library. Let me find my audio transitions. Let me put a crossfade between these two songs. And I'm actually going to, let me zoom in just a little bit closer so I can click on my crossfade. I'm going to open that in my inspector. Actually, if I double click this, it'll do the same thing. I'm going to run that up. I'm going to make that duration 2 seconds. Let's see now what happens when we listen to it. Okay, the beat is definitely a little bit off, but it's a relatively smooth transition. And I think that because it's hiding under that steaming noise, so I turned the solo off. Let's listen to it in context.
Now comes the tricky part. The milk's starting to get good and hot, and we can tell by the sound it's making. And we're ready to start just dropping...
Yeah, I don't think anyone's going to spot that. Okay, so I've gone a little bit farther than I intended to. That happens often. I'm sorry. The things that you need to remember here, you can make a clip, a single clip, louder or quieter just by clicking on the horizontal audio level and dragging it up or down. Let me undo that. And in the case of this exercise, anything you have where you've got 2 audio tracks that are handled separately, you'll have to do the same thing on the other audio track. You can make changes by inserting an audio keyframe, and the easy way to do that is just with a basic tool holding down the second modifier key. So from the keyboard moving, or from the space bar moving out, right, is the second modifier key. On an Apple, that's the Option key. I believe on a PC, that's the alternate key. And you hold that down, you point at the line, and you single click. And a dot appears, and you can make as many dots as you want to. And then just click and drag to move any individual dot up, down, left, or right. So doing that, I can now create a dip in volume here in the middle of my piece. When I'm evaluating your projects, what I look for in terms of audio are, there's a few things. One of the main ones is it should be consistent, right? If you have a voiceover, if it's a music video, whatever it is, the volume should be pretty consistent from start to finish. You've all had the experience of watching movies at home where you had to turn the volume up when they got to the conversation and you had to turn the volume down when they get to the chase scenes, right? That's obnoxious, and we want to avoid that. We want our listening experience to be relatively uniform from start to finish. I mean, you can have quieter patches and louder patches, but generally speaking, it should be very consistent. Another thing I look for is the relative balance. So in this piece, I have a voice track and I have a music track. I don't want the music track to be so loud that it's interfering with the voice, but I want it to be loud enough that it is a presence. I can tell that there's a music track back there. I will also look at the overall levels. So that's where the meters at the right come in handy. Ideally, what you want is for your audio to be peaking somewhere in the -9 area. And it can go a little bit higher than that. It can come up to -3, it can go down to -15. It wants to be hanging out at the top of the scale, though. On this particular thing, that's kind of in the area where the yellow turns to red. So if I play my video while I'm looking at these meters,
Now that our beans are ground, and let's take a look at these. As you can see, we've got a nice fine powdery.
now my balance is good. My music is not so loud that it's interfering with his voice, but it's loud enough that I can hear it. But overall, the entire piece is quieter than I would like it to be based on where these meters are. Now, I could go through here and grab everything and make it louder. There's a number of ways I could approach that. But the simplest thing to do with these meters is just to turn one of these little faders up. So if we take a look at how these are labeled, and I'm going to make this a little bit wider. So there's a fader for every audio track, all right? Audio 1. This slider here, if I run it up or down, will make everything on audio layer 1, audio track 1, louder. It doesn't actually change the volume. You won't see anything moving here on the timeline, but it will play it back more loudly. Likewise, if I move audio 2 up or down, it'll make everything on layer 2 louder or quieter. And the same thing for audio 3. This would make the entire music bed louder or quieter. My balance is good, so I don't need to change 1, 2, or 3 by themselves. I need to change everything. So this main becomes very useful. If I take this main fader and run it up a little bit, let me run it up, say 4, and let's see what we get.
Consistency here. And we're ready to load it into the cartridge.
All right, let me move back here where he's a little more chatty.
Surface, oils. When those oils have been exposed to the air for a long time, they start to turn rancid.
Okay, you can see that it's coming up when he hits oils, when he's a little bit more enthusiastic. It's coming up into the red a little bit. It's heading up towards that -5. Now again, I want it hanging out up here. I want it hanging out between -3 and about -12, or maybe -15 at the lowest. That's the sweet spot. That's where everything is comfortably loud. We never want it to make it all the way up to 0, because if it makes it up to 0, it's going to distort when we output it. And we don't want it way down here at the bottom, because we'll have to turn the volume up so loud to listen to it that whatever we listen to next is going to be blowing us out of our seats.
And it can affect the coffee flavor. So we want to be sure that we're having a nice, healthy coating of oil.
All right, I'm going to spot check. I'm just going to move down here to the end and listen a little bit.
Foam on the top of the coffee. First, we want to start by heating up all the milk in the pitcher.
Okay, so it's still hanging out in that area that I wanted. It's definitely between -3. It's underneath there. That's my absolute top. And it's consistently above -15, usually above -10. So beautiful. It's in that perfect range there. So that's really the 3 things I look for when I'm looking at audio. One is it consistent from start to finish, right? Is your voice about as loud at the beginning as it is at the end? Is the music about as loud at the beginning as it is at the end, as it is in the middle? Consistency. 2 is I look for balance. If you do have more than one audio source playing at the same time, are they mixed in such a way that I can hear what it is important for me to hear? And then the third is overall levels. Are the levels about where they need to be so that everybody who watches this later will have a pleasant experience without having to manipulate the volume of their playback device? Okay. There's a lot more we can talk about, but for the basics of audio, that's what you need to get started with. Moving on, we'll talk a little bit about effects, and then we'll tell you how to get your video out of here by exporting it.